It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, friends. I'm Rob. This is the State of the Dungeon address for the game that took place on the 10th of March in the year 2022. The game, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, the adventure, Dragon Heist, all characters were in attendance. Or all players were in attendance, so characters were there too, obviously. We started up after a session as they're building. Basically, lots of people at this point have recognized that they're up-and-comers and are throwing up-and-comer type challenges their way, giving them some opportunities to prove themselves to a variety of different folks who, let's just say, are always on the lookout for talent. Right now, they're kind of caught between the Harpers, whoever's leading them. It's as an organization that doesn't really have big names and faces attached to them because publicity is bad in their business. It's kind of a secretive thing, but it's something that Aldrich believes in heart and soul, so they've got some things to look into. Their first mission being somewhat silly, going off and finding a talking horse who draws carts through the town, and the hopes that people not generally caring about what they say around a horse, somebody might have said something revealing the presence of the Zentarum within the city, which the Harpers absolutely have nothing but disdain for the Zentarum, and as an outlaw organization, they are not welcome inside the city. They are enemies of Waterdeep, especially, of course, the Lord's Alliance, who runs the place. So that's a job they have, is to go and find this horse and find out if it has any information. Also, Luxor, the resident Tabaxi warlock, has picked up a lead that there's a paying job in finding out who's murdering elves and half-elves on the dock. So a nice charitable mission to get paid for solving a pretty heinous crime. Somebody has killed off several elves and half-elves already, so that's something that they can do. Also, Vajra, the Blackstaff, has basically asked them if they'd be interested in joining Force Grey, her own personal group of people who take care of problems. And most of the group seemed like they were pretty okay with it because, turns out, being on the premier arcane spellcaster of Waterdeep seems like it's a pretty good idea. At the very least, having access to somebody who has an archmage's powers should be a good thing, right? Well, everybody except Aldrich. Aldrich doesn't like how she basically laid out her opinion on the other factions running loose within the city, and one of them being the Harper. She's not, let's just say, she's used to cleaning up the Harper's messes, so sure, her opinion of them isn't the best, and that did turn off Aldrich. So they have all this going on, on top of trying to get their house restored so that it could be a proper tavern and appropriate living quarters for a group of up-and-coming adventurers. That's a bit of work, and a very expensive bit of work, as it turns out. But as we were starting off, Luxor had finished his training. He trains at night. All the others train through the day. So early on, Aldrich goes, because he only trances, he can get up way before everyone else, and he went off to go get his training, which he has to ascend to the heights looking over the city to go to the estate of his trainer. And his trainer is an exacting fellow, but after the first day of trying to break Aldrich through rigorous work and fencing techniques and all the other things that he's learning, he's now kind of gotten to the point where he appreciates having somebody who's got a bit of breeding and culture in them, and the pace is a bit more relaxed, even though the duels certainly aren't. He is still learning quite a bit, but this gentleman who has many of the prejudices attributed to elves. He is an elf of the elves. Seems to be warming up a little bit to Aldrich, so it's not quite as brutal as the first day was. So that's good. As far as Jazor, the paladin, goes, he went off to study his paladinly abilities, and this time he was paired up with a young cleric. Her name is Gaesra, and Gaesra is a wood elf. And her test of her faith and her stick-to-itiveness is being in the city. She's not used to it. Her people don't have big cities like this, so this is very tough for her. And it turns out that, honestly, going through the religious aspect of his faith is hard for Jazor. So they're kind of working together to shore each other up. And so far it looks like they're becoming fast friends. Jazor is finding it difficult to get all of the religious rites and prayers down that will eventually activate holy power. It's not an easy task, and he's not as bent towards scholarly pursuits as he is smashing things. Although, don't get me wrong, the guy's got no bad stats. He is perfectly fine and will be suitable, but it's just a slower process for him. He's struggling a little bit. A couple poor rolls. Of course, we had Zarya beating up more acolyte guards as part of her training. Hers is basically studying and practicing to use her rage, but also to control it. They were practicing grappling and subdual techniques, which is important for the guard, and she got a little overzealous and may have, pummeled a couple of guards a little bit more than they deserved. Maybe. A couple of them were a little handsy, but she is coming along on her barbaric training. She's got a couple of new abilities that she has to learn up yet, so they're going to concentrate on that next. Felix went out for his training. This time his training was with a full druid, because, of course, his next step is to learn how to use the magic of nature, and this druid is bringing him upon the basic principles. Since they do share some of the spells, she's bringing him along and punching through this mundane world and being able to grasp the divine sense of nature itself. So he had a good day overall. Nothing too strenuous. A lot of helping tend the natural world as the druids might. So he's getting his training from a couple different angles. So the group finishes their training and they filter back, and in different orders. First of all, before she even set off for training, Zarya was approached by a youngish half-elf, very attractive young man, who asked if she was the mistress of the house, and to let them know that he serves with the Guild of Innkeepers, and if they're interested in opening up a tavern, they're going to want to pursue the guild and get some applicants lined up to work for them. Otherwise, they'll never have staff, and the guild can do that. The guild can choke them off, so they'd be busking tables themselves if they don't get some help. So that apparently is somebody they're going to have to play games with. Zarya didn't really want to deal with that at the time, but they are aware that that's something that's going to be coming up at some point. So nothing to get away from that. Of course, some people had more time than others. Because Loxor is doing his stuff at night, he had a little bit of time during the day to stir up some shenanigans. Nothing over the top, just a couple tasks here and there. For the most part, people have had enough time to pursue their own private issues without a lot of stuff bleeding over into the group's general concern, which is nice, actually. I don't want the group to just eat, sleep, breathe right next to each other all the time. That's really not necessary in the civilized streets of Waterdeep. No monsters swooping in from the alleys typically, so I want them to have a little bit of a life in themselves outside of the group, and they are. But as things kind of built to a head, they decided that they were going to, take care of a few things. The first thing that came to mind was the horse issue. They need to find out where the horse is and how to contact this horse, Maxine. And, well, it turns out they could lean very heavily on the local talent. Luxor knew pretty much where that horse was going to be operating out of, which was the southern ward. And out of that, he knew that it was a publicly driven cart. So he knew the carters, the guild of Fellowship of Carters and Watchmen would be where he'd have to go. And he also knew that it would be stabled at the guild stables, which is one of the biggest in that ward by far. So they went to the south ward. Along the way, there was a little bit of a mystery because there was some property damage all up and down the main artery that runs basically right through the center of town. As they were going along, they saw all this destruction on the window fronts and such bashed in, a couple ornaments knocked off. It was mostly just malicious destruction. And nothing too devastating, but still, the city watch was looking around and trying to investigate and figure out what did it, and all they seemed to be able to do was throw their hands up and say it was something magical. But they did ask the help of Aldrich as he was walking along, because he does belong to the guild, and he offered a detect magic spell, which revealed that, yes, there was some sort of conjured creature that was on the loose or something that did the damage. And offering up some thoughts on what it could be, the group kind of head-shutted a little bit, but this is not a mystery for them to solve at the moment, so they just did what they could and moved on. It's just one of those weird things that can happen in Waterdeep sometimes, as strange invisible creatures can go running amok. So they get to the stables. And rather than take it as a team, they kind of do a multi-pronged approach. First of all, Luxor and Zarya move up, and they ask if they can go and see the horse. And they get the attention of a foreman. He comes over, and when they ask why, they say that the person who drove the horse, they forgot to give them a tip. And they meant to do it, so they also wanted to see the horse. And the foreman was a little suspicious, because, most people don't come to visit the horse that pulled the cart they rode in the day before for gratitude. That's very bizarre. But he wasn't too suspicious yet, until they insisted that the whole group had to go up. And now they started suspecting that these people wanted something from this horse. Something unsavory. Especially since they seemed to protest when the foreman said, yeah, but we're going to send people to watch you. They didn't seem to like that very much. Well, the reason was because they needed to hear something from the horse. It wasn't clear if anybody else knew that it was awakened or not, but they didn't want to make that public. And they wanted to interrogate the horse, which is hard to do when somebody not of your group is watching you. At this point, their protestations merely convinced the foreman that something very unsavory was going on, and he allowed Zarya and Luxor to go alone, and they would be supervised by 6 fairly tough stable hands to make sure that nothing untoward happened. A little money had passed hands too, so, for the convenience. And they went up. Now, of course, again, they still didn't want these stable hands standing nearby, so Zarya generously offered to tie them up with conversation, mostly describing how she was punching the lights out of guards. Little intimidation there, probably, but still, it was made for a good story. And this left Luxor alone with the horse. Luxor charmed the horse, not with the spell. He was nice to the horse, offered it an apple, offered some fresh water. Although he offered the water out of his own water skin, which looks like he's giving the horse possibly something. If any of the stable hands really would have paid attention to that, there would have been an uproar of him drugging the horse or poisoning the horse or something like that. Maxine was pretty happy with it, though, so she told him what he wanted to know. She said that, yeah, she had actually, a couple of days ago, had somebody in the cart. They rented it, and they discussed that they're with the Zentarim, and they're doing nefarious deeds within the city, trying to recruit, and that they were a sun elf and a half sun elf male and a half orc female. And couldn't recall what intersection they were picked up at, but that the destination was the awning portal. This would kind of become important down the road. They left easily enough. No big deal, because they didn't do anything actually bad. When they got back to the group, they're like, okay, Laxor, what'd you find out? And he's like, well, they did find some Zentarim. They had a fat ginger dwarf and a half-elf female that went with them, and it brought them to the Three Dragon Tavern. Now, they'd been to the Three Dragon Tavern before, and they knew that this place was something that the Zentarim had at least touched, because that was where the trap was sprung that caught Floon. So, okay. The group... Admittedly, I did say out loud what the horse told him so that he wouldn't have to repeat it. I did not take into account that he was going to change the story, which he did. So, the group now knows that Laxor lied to him, even if it is only player knowledge. Which is tough to role play. If they can pull it off, I give them commendations. But they were heading back when they were getting hungry. It's, getting later in the day. Many of them had a long workout and practice. And they stopped off at an eating establishment along the main artery called the White Hart. And this place is a large lodge-style eatery. It has mounted deer heads, a really good trophy deer on the walls, and the smell of meat and warm bread was overwhelming to them, so they stopped in. The place was a bit pricey. Common fare was 2 gold, and that was a meat serving of meat with various kinds, because they're very meat heavy, and a couple of greens on the side, slice of bread. Or if you paid 7 gold, you would basically almost get all you could eat. Large portions of varied meats and breads and stuffing and all kinds of good stuff. It's very tasty. They got there to the bar, and I believe it was Jazor ordered everybody a round of drinks. So the drink was very good. And there was a bartender there, and she was bright and friendly, and she tried to help them out as best as she can. She also told them that there's a problem that she's having. Another hook, right? Yeah. Turns out that they have a party of hunters that were going off into the forest to the southeast of Neverwinter. That's where they get a lot of their fresh game from. That's why their meat is so good. The only problem is they're overdue from their last expedition by a couple of days, which is odd. It's a group of 10 hunters, and they're familiar with the area enough that they have their own private hunting area that doesn't get overtaxed even when other places do. It's miles into the woods, but it's got to be probably about 20 miles off into the woods or so if local hunters don't bother their game. And they come back with sleds full of meat and skins and whatever else. These hunters must be quite accomplished. But they're missing. Nobody's seen them. Mostly, they're being paid for information. If they can find out any information about the hunters, better yet, save them. But if there's anything wrong with them, but things can happen. If somebody breaks their leg or something out there, which can happen, that can slow the entire progress down to a crawl. There's a variety of things. So no reason to assume they're dead or anything. Just they like to know. So that's something that they've got kind of hanging out there. Then they were brought to a table, and they were asked, what they wanted to eat and how much everything was. And when I dropped that the main course was $7, or 7 gold, they all just kind of, what? Some of us don't have that much. And they were talking, whispering to each other about how they were going to pay, when all of a sudden somebody piped up, I'll pay for their food. You see, the folks weren't, doing them wrong. They just assumed these people were wearing armor and had weapons on. They were adventurers, so of course they'd have coin. Not these guys. They're broke. Or some of them are fairly broke. So, but this newcomer shows up. All 2 feet of him. He introduces himself as Maximilian Maximilius, and he is a sorcerer of wide travel and some renown. He's a halfling, ghost-wise halfling, and he's very, very bold and flashy. He's got a bright blue suit, and he's got a shiny silver rapier, and he's very confident and bold in his statements. Plus, he's got magic. He demonstrated a prestidigitation spell. Laxor shot the ceiling. Everybody laughed. It was fun. And it turns out that he's a great talker. He's got lots of stories. He tied Zari up with a story about how he slipped into Thay and smuggled himself out in a coffin. Just seems to be really personable. But then he got down to business. He's new to Waterdeep, doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what's safe. And the group seems like they're pretty decent. They wouldn't lead him astray. He asked them for advice on where he could maybe rest his head for a 10-day while he, looks at the city and does stuff. And they offered to put him up in their place if he would watch the shop for them when they're out. There's carpenters coming to take care of the place. That was one of the things Aldrich did, was to work on getting a carpenter's contract out. We'll go back to that in a second. Put a pin in it. And he said, sure, if you're going to let me stay in a house with a roof over my head, even if I'm crashing in a rather small space, he's used to it. Yeah, that would be great. And he gets to go around in Waterdeep, and this could be really exciting and fun. The one thing I should remember is Aldrich was responsible with his time after his training, which got wrapped up a bit early. He actually went to the Carpenters Guild and talked to them. He actually saved their clerk from an audit from the Scribes Guild. There was some comedy about an old dwarf who had to take the audit in his place and faked a heart attack. But this young scribe is actually a savant. He's really good, and he assessed them with a fee of what would eventually come to 1,000 gold for them to completely renovate the place top to bottom so it looked new again, and also to put into motion the things they needed to do with the other guilds, because quite honestly, the Carpenters Guild is the one that generally starts big projects. If you don't have a building, there's really nothing else for you to do. So, and since they usually shake hands with all these other guilds to get all the supplies they need, he was willing to do all that for an extra fee, but it would be an extra 200 gold on top of the 800 gold for the renovation. So, that's where they're at. And it was all done on credit. To be fair, Aldrich did give him 9 platinum to start things off. So the guy knows his money. And he's like, okay, and you have a noble name, and you have a bearing that inspires confidence, and he rolled well. And the young man's like, okay, I'm authorized to assess you a certain line of credit. We'll start out with what this buys you and 500 credit. If you pay, we'll extend the credit. So if you get some money now, we'll give you another 500 beyond the money that you pony up so that we can continue working even while you're still earning that money back. He assumed that he'd be able to get it from a variety of things. Aldrich looks like he's very well connected. He's not really, but kid doesn't need to know that. But that was fun things that they did. Also, the others went and got a few things like Felix went and got gardening tools so they could clean up the yard. It's good to do, well thought out. But yeah, everybody had things to do. Now, the money that is now over the group's head, Eldrick let them know about it, of course. He's not going to keep something like that from the party. Since their names are all on the writ to property, let's just say Loxor was a little unhappy with suddenly finding himself in debt like that. It's not something he enjoys. And the rest of the group isn't thrilled with it, but it is a necessary expense if they're going to do anything with this Trollskull Manor. So, that basically is what it boiled down to, is getting that information out. So then, the group kind of went their separate ways. Zarya took Max to Trollskull Alley. They seem to have hit it off. Max is extremely charming. Zarya is gregarious. It works out fine. And as a matter of fact, a barbarian sorcerer combination just could be really devastating if you think about it. Loxor went off to get his training, because trains at night, remember. So he went off to go take care of that. But before he did, he shot off to the Yawning Portal first. And while he did not find the elf, he did find the half-orc, because she spends her time at the Yawning Portal watching things. And he got her off and said, hey, just so you know, at some point you and your boss got spotted by an agent of the Harpers as a talking horse. And you need to lay low, because the Harpers know who you are. That's probably going to mean trouble. She didn't seem, her name is Yagra, she didn't seem too worried about it. She's tough, and she can take care of herself to an extent. But she thanked him for the information, and Loxor went his own way, went back to his training, which he was told, basically, find me. And no notes or anything. He went into the miscreant's room and rummaged about, put everything back, left, and basically was jabbed with a poison, which he resisted, and was held at knife point by his crazy mentor, just to test him. So then they decided to go fishing for his training, and they went out to the docks to shoot fish using their Eldritch Blasts. That's what they do. So, the rest of the group are like, hey, we now have a lead. We know that, we know the people who are the Zentarum, and we can get some more information for the Harpers. So, they went to the Three Dragon Tavern. They'd been there before. And this is where the night gets kind of wonky, because I am only mortal. And I just kind of in the back of my head checked off the box for that mission, saying, yes, they got the information from the horse, they're good to go. No, they were actually pursuing that information, which is not where my brain connected. So I actually put them onto a site for the mission where they were looking into the murders on the docks. Kind of thought that's what they were doing. Yeah. No, they went to the Three Dragon, which happens to be a fairly decent-sized drinking hall, mostly open, and there's a bugbear bouncer there that Loxor knows. And that's where they went the first time, where they got the information about how Floon got captured after drinking with Renoir, and Volo, and playing cards and stuff. So, they went back to, again, what they thought was a Three Dragon Tavern. It actually was a place called the Leaky Pelican, which is actually built off the side of one of the docks. I'm not proud of this, but I tell the truth. I made a mistake. But they went to the Leaky Pelican instead, which has, it's a small, cramped place, pretty foul-smelling, where the alcohol is terrible. It's mostly notable for the large bartender / bouncer, who's this big Goliath who really stands out on the dock where there aren't a lot of Goliaths out there, except for some laborers who are down on their luck who work at unloading boats. This guy's a bouncer and a bartender, or bar serve. So, they go talk to him. They look for information. He comes out and he tells them. Eventually, they get out of the place because it's really tight. And he tells them, we have no overweight red-haired dwarves that come here. But there is an artificer, a tinkerer, a couple blocks away, and he makes gadgets of Gond. In this case, firearms. He makes guns. Gond works, they're called, by those who don't know much about them. And he told them the reason that could be important is because the people who were murdered, he got to see one of them. They were decapitated. Their heads were cut off. But that might not have been how they died, because the ones that he saw had a small hole punched into their bodies, bigger than a sword blade and round. A couple of them had them going all the way through the bodies, but one of them went right into the heart, did not come out the other side. So he's not exactly sure what it is. The party might suspect, but he said it sounded like something that might have come from one of those Gond works. So, it might be something they follow up on. Also, no half-elf woman who matched the description. So they're like, okay, something's up with the information we got from Loxor. We should go back and find out more about that. But before they do, they hear crack, crack, the sound of eldritch blasts firing, and then splish, splish, which in itself is not anything to get too alarmed about, until a large tentacle shot out of the water and went after Loxor's teacher. Wrapped around him, and he gave off a high-pitched scream. And the group's like, oh, somebody's in trouble. And their hero instincts kicked in, and they turned and they ran down the pier, and they ran up the beach, and they looked down the pier that Loxor and his mentor were on to find out that these tentacles had lashed out and grabbed both Loxor and the teacher at this point. And in fact, because he was entangled and firing blindly, the mentor had actually shot Loxor once with a fairly powerful bolt. So they weren't doing so good. On the other hand, help was coming. Felix is very fast. He's got that feline grace advantage and hopped ahead of Jazor, who was pounding away as fast as he could, but it's really hard to beat a Tabaxian full stride. And he ran down the beach, and he fired off an arrow at one of the tentacles. Missed. So it goes. He runs over onto the dock, climbs up onto a shed, gives himself some advantage, elevation. Miss. He wasn't having a great night shooting. At one point, the mentor is still holding on. Erroneously, Loxor uses a Burning Hand spell, which he technically no longer has since he switched to being a Hexblade, but yeah, it's okay. And did practically nothing and then just got jerked into the water. Which wasn't ideal, certainly. The mentor blasted his tentacle off, screaming out about how proud he was of killing water, because he blamed water for the death of his father. So he said. He did a lot of ranting and raving, saying some really questionable things that had Loxor's player wincing. Loxor himself got pulled into the water and found out that the creature that was attacking them was an octoped. It is an octopus-like creature, except that it's got two things. It's a little bit more aggressive about going out on land. It can actually kind of stand upright and walk to a certain extent. It's not quite as bony and wriggly as an octopus. But it can also, when it squirts out ink, it has a paralytic toxin in its ink. And Loxor was paralyzed. Fortunately, paralyzed not in mid-breath to fill his lungs. He was holding his breath, so he couldn't not hold his breath anymore. The whole matter was settled, though. Oh yeah, I think Aldrich got in a 1, maybe 2 fire bolts. I don't think he did any significant damage if he really hit. What settled the whole matter, though, Loxor did poke it once with his rapier before he was paralyzed. And then Jazor came in and tidal wave, jumping off the dock, rolled a natural 20. I'm like, wait, before you roll, okay, you already rolled, but the roll is at disadvantage because you can't see your target. It's in a cloud of ink. It's immune to the toxin, but not necessarily Jazor. So, rolls again. Another natural 20. Oof. So he killed it. He one-shotted this thing. And I shouldn't say one-shot. It was hurt already. And the combined damage was enough to kill it. Which released Loxor. So he hit it so awesomely. Not only did he kill it, he ripped out his sword and kicked off on some driftwood, surfing back to shore. It turned out the driftwood was actually Loxor. So that was cute. So they get back up on shore. And after just a moment or so, the paralysis ends. And all smeared with ink and salt water. Loxor's not feeling great at this point, but he's not dead, which is a plus. The group kind of looks askance at what's going on with the teacher, who is clearly insane. Dressed in a woman's dress, looks like he hasn't bathed in a week and a half, and mysterious red spots all over, and clearly an unhinged warlock, but Loxor is listening to him, and they escape the scene pretty much unchallenged. The group decides they're going to go and follow up and go back and talk to Maxine. So they do, and this time they know that they're on watch. People are worried about these guys and horses. Instead, they just decide to settle it. Aldrich has to disguise self, or alter self on himself, becomes the foreman that they dealt with earlier, who he's very familiar with the looks of. Larger half-orc. No problem. So he walks to the place, clean as can be, gets a couple nods of respect. His disguise is impeccable, no problem, doesn't have to say anything. Gets up to the top, does have to say a few things, but he rolls well in his performance check to sound like a grumpy half-orc. And he gets back up to Maxine's stables. Nobody's paying him any attention. The con is working perfectly. And he talks to Maxine. And again, Maxine is like, oh, I talked to Maxine before and told him the information about how I saw a sun elf and a female half-orc and took him to the yawning portal, and they were talking about being Zentarum and doing Zentarum things. And he's like, really? That's what you told him, is it? Yup. Okay, thanks for the information. Scooted off. And as he leaves, he sees two people in ill-fitting sets of stable hands clothes with short swords walking past him. And as he looks, one of them has a sleeve that's too short because the clothes are just a little too tight. And it's got the mark of the Zentarum, a winged snake, on his forearm. He's like, oh, that's not good. And they're going almost in a straight line to Maxine's. So, he does what Aldrich does. Turns around, firebolts one. Well, they see the gig is up. They turn, they draw swords, and they charge. The rest of the group, who is here, which, of course, remember, Zarya is back at Trollskull Manor, and Loxor is out training, shooting fish and doing other things. Well, the ones that are left are Jazor and Felix. So they see a flash of fire as they can see it in the stables behind. They're looking for trouble, so they see that. So they run into the stables. Their speed basically prevents the stable hands from doing much. Here come these, armed and tough-looking adventurers running into the stables. What do you do, right? So, a short battle takes place between the two Zentarum thugs and the party. The problem with the party is Aldrich is by himself. He doesn't have any first-level spells anymore because he had to disguise himself twice. So, he's relying on his fire bolts. The thugs are relying on short swords. The thugs with the short swords are a lot better at hitting wizards than the wizard is at taking them out with his firebolt. So even though at this point Felix is providing cover fire, because again that pounce got him up into the scene fast enough where he could participate, he's shooting at them. They decide they're at least going to draw some blood, and they move up and they skewer Aldrich. And before he can stop a turn and keep stabbing to finish Aldrich off, the rest of the group, well, basically, Jazor comes up because clank, 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 and justice for him is at the end of his sword. He does manage to throw a javelin and hit the guy in the side of the arm, which draws some blood, but then Felix has an amazing shot and just kills him. So at this point, they get Aldrich up, and quickly Jazor lays on hands and gives him his 5 hit points back. Not quite the full 10 points that he'll have access to in just a moment, but still. And as they're getting up, they have to answer some questions. What happened? Well, we saw these two who obviously weren't stable hands who went up and they had swords, and we had to move up to try to stop them. Okay. They were going to try to kill this horse, Maxine. Okay. We want to take the horse under custody so that it doesn't, if it's clearly in danger, if they were Zents, they'll try again to kill the horse, and we want to protect her by taking it. No, that's a guild horse. You're not taking it. We will set stable hands up to watch her, but no, you're not going to take the horse. So the group is deflected. They can't take Maxine, not with the entire guild there. That would be messy. They managed to look through the Zentarum. They had daggers, vials of poison, and they had a curious wire saw. All kinds of fun stuff. But outside of they went without armor. They just had common short swords. The only thing that identified them were the tattoos. And yes, both of them had tattoos on the arm. That's where they were left, with as many questions as answered. Incredible luck that they were there to save Maxine against that attack, but yeah, now the Watch is going to get involved, and things are going to get weird, but that's how it goes. Anyhow, that was the game that took place. That was the end of my State of the Dungeon address. I hope you enjoyed it. It is a turbulent time, and it should be very interesting coming up. So, until next time, thank you, my friends, and I will see you at the next State of the Dungeon. Until then, I am Rob. Farewell.